The desert wind carried the smell of gunpowder and blood across the red canyon walls. Jack Callahan pressed himself against the sandstone outcrop, his Winchester rifle hot in his hands, sweat carving rivers through the dust on his face. Below him, in the narrow gulch, 4 men circled a woman tied to a wagon wheel. Her dress was torn, her dark hair hung loose around her shoulders, but her eyes, even from this distance, blazed with defiance. Jack's jaw tightened. He knew those men. Knew their leader anyway. Cal Driscoll, a snake who'd been terrorizing the Arizona territory for the better part of 3 years. The woman was likely a hostage, taken from one of the stagecoaches that had gone missing on the Tucson route. He should ride away. That's what any sensible man would do. Jack Callahan wasn't a lawman anymore, hadn't worn a badge in 5 years. Not since the day his decisions got good people killed. Not since he learned that sometimes doing what you think is right only brings more darkness into the world. But something about the way the woman held her head high, even with a gun barrel inches from her temple, made him think of another woman, another time. Another failure he could never undo. Jack squeezed his eyes shut for just a moment, seeing Emily's face as clear as if she stood before him. Emily, who'd believed in him when he was a cocky young deputy who thought his gun and his badge made him invincible. Emily, who died because he'd been too proud, too certain, too damn foolish to listen to reason. When he opened his eyes, the woman in the gulch was staring directly at him. She couldn't possibly have spotted him from that angle, hidden as he was in the rocks. But somehow, she knew someone was up there. And in that brief moment of eye contact, Jack saw the same thing he'd seen in Emily's eyes 7 years ago. A desperate hope that someone, anyone, might be brave enough or stupid enough to help. He checked his ammunition. 6 shots in the Winchester, another 6 in his Colt. 4 men below. Bad odds, but he'd faced worse. Hell with it, Jack muttered, and squeezed the trigger. The first shot took Driscoll's hat clean off his head. The second kicked up dust at the feet of the man nearest the woman. Jack didn't want to kill if he could avoid it. That was the old Jack talking, the one who still believed in law and justice. But he needed them scattered, confused, afraid. Up in the rocks. One of the men shouted, and the bullet started flying. Jack moved quickly, using the terrain like he'd learned during his years chasing outlaws through these same canyons. He fired twice more, then scrambled 20 feet to his left before the return fire could find him. A ricochet whined off the stone where he'd been crouched. Below, the woman had somehow worked one hand partially free and was struggling with the ropes. Smart. She wasn't. Waiting to be saved, she was saving herself. That changed Jack's calculus. He aimed more carefully now, targeting the men who were trying to regroup. A shot to the shoulder dropped one outlaw, screaming and clutching his arm. Another round sent a second man diving for cover behind a boulder. Driscoll, though, was heading for the woman, using her as a shield. Jack's blood ran cold. "You up there!" Driscoll shouted, his gun pressed against the woman's temple. "Show yourself or I paint these rocks with her brains." Jack stood slowly, rifle still aimed. He was 40 yards up the canyon wall, far enough that a pistol shot would be lucky to reach him, close enough that he could see the woman's chest rising and falling with rapid breaths. "Let her go, Driscoll," Jack called down. "You're outgunned, and you know it. That you, Callahan?" Driscoll squinted up at him, then laughed, a harsh sound that echoed off the canyon walls. "Heard you crawled into a whiskey bottle after what happened in Silver Creek. Guess the rumors of your cowardice were exaggerated." The words hit like physical blows, but Jack kept his rifle steady. "Only thing that needs to happen here is you walk away. Leave the woman, take your men, and ride out. Can't do that, Callahan. See this lady here? She's worth $5,000 to some people in Santa Fe. That's a lot of money to leave behind. Won't spend a dime of it if you're dead." The woman's eyes hadn't left Jack's face. There was calculation there, intelligence. She was measuring distances, watching the other outlaws, waiting for her moment. Then she moved. She threw her weight backward, slamming her head into Driscoll's nose. The outlaw's grip loosened for just a second, and she tore free, running toward the rocks. Jack fired twice in rapid succession, forcing Driscoll to dive for cover instead of shooting her in the back. The woman scrambled up the loose scree of the canyon wall with surprising agility, her torn dress catching on stones, her hands bloody from the ropes. Jack provided covering fire, his shots precise and measured, keeping the outlaws pinned. She reached his position, breathing hard, her face flushed. Up close, Jack could see she was younger than he'd thought, maybe 25, with fierce dark eyes that assessed him in an instant. "You have a horse?" she gasped. "Half-mile north. Can you ride?" "Better than I can climb." She grabbed the rifle from his hands before he could protest, aimed down into the gulch, and fired. One of the outlaws yelped and dropped his gun. "We should go, now." Jack stared at her for a heartbeat, impressed despite himself, then nodded. "Follow me." They moved through the rocks like ghosts, the woman keeping pace despite her injuries and torn clothing. Behind them, Driscoll was shouting orders, but the outlaws had lost their taste for the fight. Nobody wanted to chase an enemy into the high rocks where every stone could hide an ambush. Jack's horse, a sturdy bay gelding named Prophet, waited where he'd left him, tied in the shade of a twisted juniper. The woman didn't hesitate. She swung up into the saddle with practiced ease, then reached down to pull Jack up behind her. "I'll ride," she said, her tone brooking no argument. "You shoot if they follow." They rode hard for 20 minutes, putting distance between them and the canyon. When Jack finally called for her to stop, they were in a maze of red rock formations that would make tracking them nearly impossible. The woman dismounted, wincing as her feet hit the ground. Now that the adrenaline was fading, Jack could see she was hurt worse than she'd let on. Her wrists were raw and bleeding from the ropes. There was a cut on her cheek, and she was favoring her left side. "You need water," Jack said, reaching for his canteen. She took it, drank deeply, then poured some over her wrists, hissing at the pain. "Thank you," she said finally, her voice hoarse. "For what you did back there. Can you tell me your name?" She studied him for a long moment, as if deciding how much to trust. Elena Morales. Jack Callahan, I know." "Driscoll said your name." She handed back the canteen, her eyes sharp despite her exhaustion. "Why would you save me? You don't know me." "From what Driscoll said, you're not even a lawman anymore." It was the question Jack had been asking himself since he'd pulled the trigger. Why had he risked his life for a stranger? Why had he broken the promise he'd made 5 years ago to never again put himself in a position where his actions might get someone killed? He didn't have a good answer. Not one that made sense anyway. "Seemed like the right thing to do," he said finally. Elena laughed, but it was a bitter sound. "The right thing." "In my experience, Mr. Callahan, people don't do the right thing. They do the convenient thing, the profitable thing, or the cowardly thing. Nobody risks their life for a stranger just because it's right. Maybe I'm nobody then." She shook her head slowly, still studying him with those intense dark eyes. "No, you're someone running from something. I can see it in the way you move, the way you look over your shoulder. You're not a hero, Mr. Callahan, so I'll ask you again, why did you save me?" Jack looked away, across the desert landscape, painted gold and crimson by the setting sun. In the distance, a hawk circled, riding the thermals up into the endless sky. "Because 7 years ago, I didn't save someone I should have," he said quietly. "And I've been trying to outrun that failure ever since. When I saw you down there, saw the way they were treating you, I couldn't ride away. Not again." The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken things. Elena's expression softened, just a fraction. "The person you didn't save," she said. "Someone you loved?" "Her name was Emily. She was going to be my wife." Elena nodded slowly, understanding passing between them without need for more words. "I'm sorry." "So am I." She was quiet for a moment, then asked, "Where were you headed before you decided to play hero?" "Nowhere in particular."
Just away. Driscoll said I'm worth $5,000 in Santa Fe. I'm guessing he wasn't lying about that part. Jack's attention snapped back to her. What did you do? I witnessed something I wasn't supposed to see. Something that involves some very powerful, very dangerous people. Elena's jaw tightened. They sent Driscoll and his men to make sure I never make it to the territorial court to testify. What did you witness? Murder, land fraud. Enough corruption to hand half the businessmen in Santa Fe, if the right people hear what I know. She met his eyes. I was working as a clerk for the land office when I discovered documents showing how Governor Harrison's business partners have been forcing Mexican families off their legal property deeds, then selling the land to railroad interests for massive profits. When I tried to report it, they killed my supervisor and came after me. Jack swore softly. Governor Harrison is connected to some of the most ruthless men in the territory. If what you're saying is true, it's true. I have documents, proof. Hidden in Santa Fe. I just need to survive long enough to get them to the federal marshal. That's a hell of a thing to carry. I didn't ask for it. But I'm not going to let my supervisor die for nothing, and I'm not going to let them keep stealing from people who can't defend themselves. Elena's voice was fierce. So I'll ask you one more time, Mr. Callahan. Are you going to help me, or was this rescue just a way to ease your conscience before you ride off again? It was a fair question. Jack had told himself for 5 years that he was done being responsible for other people's lives, that the weight of Emily's death was more than he could bear, and adding more names to his list of failures would break him completely. But looking at Elena Morales, seeing the determination in her bruised face and the fire in her eyes, Jack realized something. He'd been carrying Emily's death like a burden, using it as an excuse to hide from the world. But maybe, just maybe, helping this woman reach Santa Fe wasn't about redemption. Maybe it was about choosing, just once, to do the hard thing instead of the easy thing. Santa Fe is a week's ride from here, he said. Driscoll and his men will be hunting us every step of the way. The people paying him have resources, money, connections, more guns. The odds of us making it there alive aren't good. I'm aware. If we do this, there's no turning back. No changing your mind halfway through. Elena smiled, and for the first time, Jack saw genuine warmth in it. Mr. Callahan, I've been running for 3 weeks. I've been shot at, beaten, nearly killed half a dozen times. I'm not afraid of long odds. Jack extended his hand. Then I guess we're riding to Santa Fe. She shook it, her grip strong despite her injuries. I guess we are. As the sun dipped below the horizon and the desert air turned cold, Jack made camp in the shelter of the rocks. He dressed Elena's wounds with water and strips of cloth from his spare shirt, built a small smokeless fire, and heated beans and coffee. They ate in comfortable silence, both too tired for much conversation. But as the stars began to emerge in the vast desert sky, Elena spoke again. The person you lost, Emily, tell me about her. Jack stared into the fire, old pain stirring in his chest. She was the daughter of a rancher outside Silver Creek. I met her when I arrested her brother for drunk and disorderly. She came to the jail to bail him out, and she was so angry, so fierce. I fell for her right then and there. What happened to her? I happened to her. Jack's voice was rough. There was an outlaw gang operating in the territory, robbing banks, killing anyone who got in their way. I'd been chasing them for months, and I finally got word they were hiding at an abandoned mine outside town. I should have waited for backup, should have telegraphed for help from the territorial marshal. But I was young and stupid and thought I could handle it myself. He paused, the memory as sharp as broken glass. Emily knew where I was going, tried to talk me out of it. When I wouldn't listen, she followed me. Wanted to make sure I didn't get myself killed. When the shooting started, she was caught in the crossfire. Died in my arms while I told her I was sorry, that I'd been an idiot, that I loved her. Elena was quiet for a long moment. That wasn't your fault, wasn't it? If I'd listened to her, if I'd waited for backup, if I'd been less concerned with being a hero,
and more concerned with being smart. Then maybe you'd have lived with a different regret. Maybe the outlaws would have escaped and killed more people. Maybe the backup would have arrived too late. Elena leaned forward, her eyes reflecting the firelight. You can't know, Mr. Callahan. All you know is that you tried to do the right thing, and someone you loved paid the price. That's not the same as being responsible for her death. Tell that to the part of me that sees her face every time I close my eyes. I could, but you wouldn't believe me any more than you believe yourself. Elena wrapped her arms around her knees, staring up at the stars. My father used to say that guilt is just love with nowhere to go. You loved Emily, and when she died, all that love turned into guilt because you had to blame someone. And the easiest person to blame was yourself. Jack felt something crack inside his chest, some wall he'd built up over years of self-recrimination. Your father sounds like a wise man. He was. He died defending our family's land from men like the ones I'm trying to stop. Elena's voice hardened. That's why I can't give up, why I can't just disappear into Mexico or California like Driscoll's employers probably hope I will. My father taught me that some things are worth fighting for, even when the odds are against you. They sat in silence after that, two wounded souls keeping watch in the darkness, bound together by circumstance and the dangerous road ahead. As Jack settled into his bedroll, his rifle close at hand, he realized that for the first time in 5 years, he wasn't running away from something. He was running towards something, toward redemption, maybe, or just toward the man he used to be before Emily died. Either way, there was no turning back now. The desert dawn came cold and pink, painting the canyon walls in shades of rose and amber. Jack was already awake, had been for an hour, listening to the morning sounds of the wilderness and watching for any sign that Driscoll's men had found their trail. Elena stirred, wincing as her injuries made themselves known. Jack had coffee ready, strong and black, and she accepted it gratefully. How far to the nearest town? She asked. Copper Ridge, maybe 8 hours ride east. But that's the first place Driscoll will expect us to go. There's another settlement, smaller, called Rio Seco. It's out of the way, but we might be able to get supplies there without attracting attention. How long a detour? Day and a half. Elena considered this, her dark eyes calculating. We risk it. If Driscoll catches us out here with no ammunition, no food, we're dead anyway. Jack nodded. She was practical, this woman. Not given to panic or second-guessing. He liked that. They rode through the morning, keeping to the rough country where tracks would be harder to follow. Prophet carried them both with steady endurance, though Jack could tell the horse wouldn't be able to maintain this pace forever. They'd need fresh mounts eventually. Around midday, they stopped to rest in the shade of a rock overhang. Elena's hands were steadier now, and she helped Jack refill their canteens from a small spring that seeped from the rocks. Tell me about Driscoll, she said. You know him? Crossed paths with him a few times when I wore a badge. He's mean, but he's not stupid. Knows this territory as well as anyone. If he's tracking us, he'll figure out where we're headed eventually. Then we need to be smarter than him. You have a plan? Elena smiled, working on it. How many men does he have? He rode with 4 back at that canyon. But he usually runs with a bigger crew, maybe 10, 12 total. If he's smart, he sent word for the others to meet him. So we're outnumbered at least 3 to 1. Closer to 5 to 1, once his full crew catches up. I've faced worse odds. Jack raised an eyebrow. Have you? No, Elena admitted. But it sounded brave when I said it. Despite himself, Jack laughed. It felt strange, that sound coming from his throat. He couldn't remember the last time he'd laughed. They rode on through the afternoon, the sun beating down mercilessly. Elena proved to be as tough as she'd claimed. She didn't complain about the heat or the pain from her injuries, just kept her eyes on the horizon and her hands ready to grab the rifle if needed. As evening approached, they spotted smoke rising from a distant point, Rio Seco, finally. But as they drew closer, Jack's instincts prickled with warning. "Something's wrong," he murmured. "What?" "Too much smoke." And no sounds from the town. They approached cautiously, Jack's hand on his pistol. What they found made his blood run cold. Rio Seco had been hit hard. Buildings burned, bodies in the street, the few survivors huddled in terrified groups. Jack dismounted, helping Elena down, and approached an old Mexican man who was sitting in front of a ruined cantina. "What happened here?" Jack asked in Spanish. The old man looked up with hollow eyes. "Los Bandidos. They came this morning, asking about a woman and a man traveling together. When we said we'd seen no one, they didn't believe us. Started shooting, burning ... His voice broke. Elena's face had gone pale. "They did this because of me. They did this because they're animals," Jack said grimly. "This isn't your fault." But he could see she didn't believe him. The guilt in her eyes was the same guilt he'd carried for 5 years. The weight of knowing that your choices, however right they might be, have consequences for innocent people. They helped where they could, bandaged wounds, gave out what little water they had, moved bodies out of the sun. The town's priest, an elderly man with kind eyes and blood on his cassock, approached them as they worked. "You're the ones they were asking about," he said softly. It wasn't a question. "Yes," Elena said. "I'm sorry. If I'd known ... If you'd known, what would you have done differently?" The priest shook his head. "Evil men do evil things. That is their choice, not yours. But I see in your eyes that you carry something important, something worth protecting. Am I right? I have evidence that could put away some very corrupt men. But the price ... Elena looked around at the devastation. "Maybe the price is too high. And if you give up, what then?" The priest's voice was gentle but firm. "Those corrupt men continue their corruption. More people suffer for longer. The men who did this today will do it again tomorrow, to another town, to other innocents. You cannot control what evil men do, senorita. You can only control what you do." Elena was quiet for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Thank you, Father. There is a ranch 30 miles north of here. The Vasquez family. They are good people, and they have no love for the governor or his men. They might help you." He pressed a folded piece of paper into Jack's hand. "Give them this. It will let them know I sent you." They left Rio Seco as the sun set, both of them heavy with what they'd seen. The destruction followed them into the darkness, a reminder of what was at stake. They made camp in a small canyon, sheltered from the wind. Jack started a fire while Elena tended to Prophet, who'd earned his feed after a long day's ride. When she came back to the fire, her face was troubled. "How do you live with it?" She asked abruptly. "The guilt. The knowledge that people died because of your choices." Jack stared into the flames. "Honestly, most days I don't. Most days I just try to get through without thinking about it too much. I drink enough to keep the nightmares at bay and ride far enough that I don't have to face anyone who knew me before. That's not living. That's just ... existing. Maybe so. But it's what I could manage." Elena sat down across from him, the fire between them. "When I first saw what those documents contained, I thought about running. Mexico is only a few days' ride from where I was. I could have disappeared, changed my name, started over. Nobody would have blamed me. Why didn't you?" "Because I kept thinking about my father. About how he stood up to the men who wanted our land, even though he knew they were more powerful, better armed, better connected. He died for that land, and not because it was worth money, but because it was ours. Because giving in to bullies means they'll just find another victim tomorrow." She poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling up into the night. "I don't want to be the person who runs. I don't want to be the person who knows something evil is happening and does nothing to stop it. Even if the cost is high, the cost might be your life. Then at least I'll die standing up instead of running away." She looked up at him, and in the firelight, Jack could see the steel in her eyes. "You saved me today, not because you're trying to make up for Emily's death, Mr. Callahan. You saved me because despite everything you've been through, despite all the guilt you carry, you're still the kind of man who can't stand by and watch injustice happen. That's worth something." Jack didn't know what to say to that. The words struck too close to something he'd been trying not to think about, the possibility that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't as irredeemable as he'd convinced himself. "We should get some rest," he said finally. "Long day tomorrow, Mr. Callahan?" "Jack, just call me Jack. Jack then." Elena smiled. "Thank you. Not just for today, but for reminding me that there are still good people in this world. I'm not good. I'm just too stubborn to be completely bad. I'll take it." They settled into their bedrolls, Jack taking the first watch. As Elena's breathing steadied into sleep, he found himself thinking about what she'd said. About standing up instead of running. About being the kind of man who couldn't ignore injustice. Maybe she was right. Maybe somewhere underneath all the guilt and self-loathing, there was still a spark of the man he'd been before Emily died. The man who'd become a lawman because he believed in protecting people, in standing between the innocent and the wolves who'd prey on them. The question was whether that man was strong enough to see this through to the end. The Vasquez Ranch appeared in the morning light like a mirage sprawl of adobe, buildings nestled in a valley where water ran year-round, creating an oasis of green against the brown desert. Cattle grazed in the distance, and smoke rose from the main house's chimney. Jack and Elena approached cautiously, mindful that Driscoll could have reached here first. But the ranch hands who met them seemed genuine in their welcome, especially after Jack showed them the priest's note. The family patriarch, Don Miguel Vasquez, was a man in his 60s with silver hair and eyes that had seen too much but still held warmth. He read the priest's note, then studied Jack and Elena with a measuring gaze. "Father Antonio says you carry evidence against the governor's men," he said in accented but perfect English. "And that murderers hunt you. That's accurate," Elena replied. "Then you are welcome here. The men who work for Governor Harrison stole my nephew's land last year, made him sign papers under threat of death, then kicked his family out with nothing. When we tried to get justice through the courts... He shook his head. "There is no justice when corrupt men control the judges." He led them into the house, where his wife Dona Maria immediately took charge of Elena, leading her away to be bathed and fed and her injuries properly tended. Jack found himself alone with Don Miguel and two of his sons, Carlos and Roberto. "How many men hunt you?" Don Miguel asked. "At least 10, maybe more, led by an outlaw named Cal Driscoll. They're ruthless and well-armed, and they will come here once they follow your trail." It wasn't a question. Jack nodded. Carlos, the older son, spoke up. "Then we should prepare. Our ranch has defended itself before. These men destroyed Rio Seco yesterday," Jack said grimly. "Killed anyone who got in their way. I won't bring that kind of violence to your home. You did not bring it, Senator. It follows you, yes, but it exists whether you are here or not." Don Miguel's voice was firm. "These men are a sickness in this territory. If we can help cut out that sickness, then it is worth the risk." Over the next few hours, Jack found himself planning a defense with men he'd just met, but who reminded him of the best kind of people he'd known in his lawman days. Honest, tough, and willing to stand up for what was right. Elena emerged from the house wearing clean clothes borrowed from Dona Maria, her wounds bandaged, her hair pulled back. She looked younger without the trail dust and blood, but her eyes were still hard with determination. "They're coming," she said simply. "How do you know?" One of the ranch hands spotted dust on the south trail. A lot of riders moving fast. She looked at the ranch's layout with a tactical eye. "How defensible is this place?" "Defensible enough if we're smart," Carlos said. "Stone walls, good sight lines, water supply that can't be cut off. But if they have enough men and enough time... They won't have time," Jack interrupted. "Elena and I need to reach Santa Fe. That's the goal. We just need to hold them off long enough to get a head start." Don Miguel shook his head. "No, if you run now, they will catch you on the road.
Better to make a stand here, hurt them badly enough that they cannot follow. Then you ride to Santa Fe while they lick their wounds. It was sound strategy, Jack had to admit. And looking at the faces of the Vasquez family, their sons and daughters, the ranch hands who'd worked this land for years, he saw the same determination he'd seen in Elena's eyes. These people were tired of being victims. They were ready to fight back. "All right," Jack said. "Then let's give them a fight they won't forget." The preparation took the rest of the day. They fortified the main house, positioned riflemen at key points, prepared escape routes in case the defense failed. The women and children were sent to a hidden cellar below the main house, with supplies to last several days if needed. As the sun began to set, Jack found Elena on the roof of the house, watching the southern horizon. "Having second thoughts?" he asked, climbing up beside her. "Every second." She didn't look at him, her eyes fixed on the distance. "All these people, putting themselves in danger because of me ... Not because of you, because of what you represent. A chance to strike back at the men who've been hurting them for years." Jack settled in beside her. "Sometimes people need to fight, Elena, need to feel like they're not powerless. You're giving them that. And if they die, then they die defending their home against evil men. There are worse ways to go." Elena was quiet for a long moment. "When this is over, if we survive, what will you do?" Jack hadn't thought that far ahead. For 5 years, he'd drifted from place to place, never staying long enough to put down roots. The idea of a future beyond the next town, the next day, felt foreign. "I don't know," he admitted. "Haven't thought much past making sure you get to Santa Fe alive. You could come with me. Testify about what happened in Rio Seco, about Driscoll and his men. With your reputation as a former lawman, ... My reputation is that I got my fiancée killed and then ran away from the badge. Not exactly credible witness material. People can change. You're not the same man who ran away 5 years ago, aren't I? I'm still running, just in a different direction." Elena turned to look at him fully, her dark eyes intense in the fading light. "No, running away is what you were doing before you saw me in that canyon. What you're doing now is running toward something. Toward redemption, toward justice, toward being the man you used to be." "That's different." Before Jack could respond, a shout came from below. "Riders coming!" They scrambled down from the roof and took their positions. Jack counted the approaching riders 12, just as he'd estimated. Driscoll rode at the front, his face a mask of determination and rage. The outlaws stopped just out of rifle range, and Driscoll called out, "Callahan, send out the woman and we'll ride away. Nobody else needs to die today." Jack stepped out onto the porch, his rifle held loosely in his hands. "You know I can't do that, Driscoll. Then you're choosing to get all these people killed. Look around you, Callahan family's children. Is one woman's life worth all of theirs?" It was a good argument, one calculated to prey on Jack's guilt. He felt the old familiar weight settling on his shoulders, the knowledge that his choices would determine whether the people behind him lived or died. Then Elena stepped out beside him. "I'm Elena Morales," she called out. "And I'm not going anywhere with you. The documents I have will expose Governor Harrison and every corrupt official working with him. You can kill me, but you can't kill the truth." "The truth dies all the time, Senorita," Driscoll laughed. "You'll be just another disappeared person in the territories, and in 6 months, nobody will remember your name." "Maybe," Elena said, "but they'll remember yours. The man who burned Rio Seco, the man who murdered women and children to protect rich men's secrets. That will be your legacy, Driscoll. How does it feel to be a lapdog for cowards?" The outlaw's face darkened with rage. "Last chance, Puta. Come out now, or we burn this place to the ground." "Then burn," Don Miguel's voice rang out from inside the house. "We have faced worse than you and survived. Our land has been in our family for generations, and it will remain so long after your bones are dust." For a moment, there was silence.
Then Driscoll drew his pistol and fired. The shot went wild, but it was the signal. Suddenly the air was full of bullets, the ranch hands and family members returning fire from windows and walls. Jack and Elena dove back inside as lead chewed into the porch posts. The battle settled into a pattern. The outlaws would charge, trying to get close enough to set fires or breach the walls, and the defenders would drive them back with concentrated fire. Carlos proved to be an excellent shot, dropping 2 of Driscoll's men in the first hour. Roberto coordinated the defense from the house's second floor, calling out positions and movements. But as night fell, Jack knew they were in trouble. The outlaws had pulled back but hadn't left. They were waiting for darkness when they could move more freely, set fires more easily. "We need to change the game," he said to Carlos. "If we just sit here and defend, eventually they'll find a weakness. What do you suggest?" Jack's mind worked through the options. Driscoll was smart but predictable. He'd attack from the south again, where the terrain gave him the most cover, which meant, "Get me 3 men who can move quietly. We're going hunting." An hour later, Jack and 3 ranch hands slipped out the back of the house and circled around through the darkness. The outlaws were camped a quarter-mile away, confident in their superior numbers, waiting for the right moment to attack. Jack and his small team moved like shadows, using every bit of cover. When they were in position behind the outlaws' camp, Jack gave the signal. They opened fire all at once, the sudden attack from behind throwing Driscoll's men into chaos. In the confusion, Jack could see the outlaw leader screaming orders, trying to rally his men, but it was too late. 3 more went down before Driscoll realized the trap and ordered a retreat. Jack and his team raced back to the ranch under cover of darkness. When they returned, Don Miguel was grinning. 8 men left now, he said. Better odds. But Jack wasn't celebrating. He'd seen Driscoll's face in those last moments before the retreat. The outlaw wasn't beaten, he was furious. And a cornered, angry man was the most dangerous kind. "He'll come at dawn," Jack said. "Everything he has, all at once. He knows he's losing men and losing time. This is his last chance to finish this before we can get away." Elena appeared at his side, her face smudged with powder smoke. "Then we need to be ready." They spent the night reinforcing positions, redistributing ammunition, preparing for the final assault. The mood in the house was tense but determined. These people had committed to the fight, and they would see it through. Jack found himself on watch in the hours before dawn, the desert cold seeping into his bones. Elena joined him, wrapped in a borrowed blanket. "Can't sleep?" he asked. "Too much to think about." She settled beside him, close enough that he could feel her warmth. "Jack, if something happens to me tomorrow, nothing's going to happen. But if it does, you need to know where the documents are hidden. There's a false bottom in a trunk at the Santa Fe land office, my old workspace. 3rd floor, northwest corner. The evidence is their deeds, transfer papers, correspondence between Harrison and his partners. Everything needed to prove what they've done." Jack nodded, memorizing the details. "You're going to deliver those documents yourself." "I hope so." "But hope isn't a plan." She turned to look at him, and in the starlight, he could see the fear she'd been hiding behind determination. "I'm scared, Jack. Not of dying, exactly, but of failing. Of all of this being for nothing. It won't be for nothing. Win or lose tomorrow, you've already accomplished something. You've shown these people that standing up to corruption is possible. You've given them hope that things can change, have I? Or have I just gotten good people killed for an ideal that won't change anything?" Jack understood the doubt, the second-guessing. He'd lived with it for 5 years. Emily used to say that the world changes one person at a time. One person deciding to do the right thing, inspiring another person, and another. She said that's how justice works, not through grand gestures, but through small acts of courage that add up over time. She sounds like she was remarkable. She was, and she was right. Jack met Elena's eyes. "What you're doing matters, Elena. Not because it might bring down a corrupt governor or fix a broken system. It matters because you chose to fight instead of run. That choice alone is enough. Elena leaned her head against his shoulder, and for a moment, they sat in silence, two battered souls finding comfort in each other's presence. Jack felt something crack open inside him, some wall he'd built around his heart beginning to crumble. Maybe redemption wasn't about erasing the past. Maybe it was about choosing, in each moment, to be better than you were before. To fight when fighting seemed impossible. To hope when hope seemed foolish. To save someone even knowing you couldn't save everyone. Dawn came cold and pink, painting the desert in shades of blood and gold. Driscoll's remaining men appeared on horseback, spreading out in a line. The outlaw leader rode forward alone, stopping just within shouting distance. "This is your last chance," he called. "Give us the woman, or everyone dies." Jack stepped out onto the porch, Elena beside him. Don Miguel and his sons joined them, a united front. "We've made our choice." Jack shouted back, "If you want her, come and take her." Driscoll's answering roar was pure rage. He spurred his horse forward, and his men followed, charging the ranch in a final desperate assault. The defenders opened fire, and the morning erupted in violence. The battle was chaos and thunder. Bullets tore through wood and adobe, shattered windows, kicked up geysers of dirt in the yard. Jack moved through it all with deadly precision, his years of experience guiding every shot, every movement. Beside him, Elena proved she could shoot as well as she claimed, her rifle barking steadily as she picked her targets. Driscoll's men reached the house, and suddenly the fight turned close and brutal. Jack found himself face to face with a scarred outlaw who tried to drag him from the porch. They grappled, trading blows, until Jack got his pistol free and fired point blank. Carlos went down with a bullet in his leg, and his brother Roberto dragged him to cover, still firing with one hand. Don Miguel fought with the fury of a man defending his home, his family, everything he'd built over a lifetime. Through it all, Jack kept one eye on Elena. She'd taken position on the roof again, using the height advantage to devastating effect. Two more of Driscoll's men went down under her fire. Then Jack saw Driscoll himself, dismounted, working his way around to the side of the house where the defenses were weakest. The outlaw had a torch in one hand, a gun in the other. He was going for the wooden barn. If he got it burning, the fire would spread to the main house, and they'd have to evacuate into his guns. Jack sprinted across the open yard, bullets whining past him. He tackled Driscoll just as the outlaw reached the barn, and they went down in a tangle of limbs and curses. Driscoll was strong and mean, fighting with the desperation of a man who knew this was his last chance. They rolled in the dirt, trading savage blows. The torch fell, guttering in the dust. Driscoll got his gun up, but Jack knocked it away. The outlaw's fist caught Jack in the jaw, sending stars across his vision. "You should have stayed away, Callahan." Driscoll spat, his hands going for Jack's throat. "Should have kept running like the coward you are." Jack drove his knee into Driscoll's gut, breaking the choke. "Maybe I was a coward," he gasped. "But I'm done running." He landed a solid punch that split Driscoll's lip, followed it with another, but the outlaw wouldn't stay down. They grappled again, rolling toward where Driscoll's pistol had fallen. Both men saw it at the same time. Both reached for it. A rifle shot cracked across the yard, and Driscoll jerked, his hand falling short. He looked down at the blood spreading across his chest, then up at the house where Elena stood on the roof, rifle still raised. "That's for Rio Seco," she called down, her voice cold as winter. Driscoll fell back, his eyes already glazing. Jack stood over him, breathing hard, his body a map of bruises and cuts. The shooting had stopped. Of Driscoll's 8 remaining men, 4 were down, and the other 4 had their hands raised in surrender, unwilling to die for a paycheck. It was over. They spent the day tending wounds and securing prisoners. The Vasquez family had suffered. Carlos's leg wound would take months to heal. 2 ranch hands were dead, several others injured, but they'd held their ground. They'd won. That night, as Jack helped bury the dead, he felt the weight of it all settling on his shoulders. More people dead because of his choices. More names to add to the list of those who'd paid the price for his actions. He was sitting alone on the porch when Elena found him, 2 cups of coffee in her hands. She sat beside him without a word, just offering the coffee and her presence. "Don Miguel says we can rest here a few more days before pushing on to Santa Fe," she said finally. "Good, you need time to heal properly." "So do you." Jack looked down at his battered hands, the bruises blooming purple and yellow. "This was supposed to be simple. Get you out of that canyon, point you toward safety, right away. But you didn't right away." "No, and because I didn't, 2 men died today. Good men with families." Elena was quiet for a moment. "Carlos told me something while I was helping bandage his leg. He said his family has been waiting for a chance to strike back at the men who've been stealing from their neighbors, intimidating their community. He said that when Father Antonio's note arrived, describing what I was carrying, they knew this was that chance. That doesn't make it hurt less." "No," she agreed. "But it means their choice was their own. They didn't die because of you, Jack. They died because they chose to fight for something they believed in. That matters." Jack stared out at the desert, at the stars beginning to emerge in the darkening sky. 7 years ago, I made a choice that got Emily killed. I've spent every day since then trying to avoid making choices that would hurt anyone else. But today, today you made a choice that saved my life. That gave the Vasquez family a chance to fight back. That stopped Driscoll from hurting anyone else." Elena set down her coffee and turned to face him fully. "Do you remember what I asked you that first day? When you saved me, you asked why I would save you, and you said it was because you didn't save someone you should have, that you couldn't right away." "Not again." Her eyes held his, dark and intense. "I'm going to ask you that question one more time, Jack, and I want you to answer it honestly, not based on guilt or regret, but based on who you are right now. Why did you save me?" Jack thought about it. Really thought about it, pushing past the layers of guilt and self-recrimination that had defined him for so long. "I saved you," he said slowly, "because when I saw you in that canyon, I saw someone worth fighting for. Someone brave enough to stand up against corruption and cruelty, even knowing it might cost everything. I saved you because some things are worth the risk. Some people are worth the risk, even if the cost is high." Even then, Elena smiled, and there was something soft in it, something that made Jack's heart ache. "That's the answer I was hoping for. Not because you owed someone from your past, but because you chose someone in your present. That's the difference between guilt and purpose, Jack. Guilt looks backward. Purpose looks forward." She reached out and took his hand, and Jack let himself feel the warmth of another person's touch, the connection he'd denied himself for so long. "I need you to understand something," Elena said. "When we get to Santa Fe, when I testify, there's going to be danger. Harrison and his people won't give up just because Driscoll is dead. They'll send more men, better men. The courts might be compromised. I might not survive this. You will. I'll make sure of it. You can't promise that. Nobody can." She squeezed his hand. "But I need to know, are you with me? Not because you're trying to make up for Emily, but because you choose to be. Because you believe in what we're doing." Jack looked at her, this fierce, determined woman who'd somehow dragged him out of 5 years of self-imposed exile and reminded him what it felt like to fight for something that mattered. Who'd looked at his guilt and regret and seen past them to the man underneath. "I'm with you," he said. "Not because of Emily, but because of you. Because what you're doing is right, and because double quote." He paused, searching for the words. "Because I'm tired of running away from who I used to be. Tired of letting the past define my future. You reminded me that I can still be the man who stands up, who fights back, who protects people who need protecting. Even if it costs you." Even then, Elena leaned forward and kissed him, soft and gentle, a promise and a hope wrapped up in that moment. When she pulled back, her eyes were bright. "Then let's finish this," she said. Together, they left the Vasquez ranch 3 days later, riding fresh horses provided by Don Miguel, their saddlebags full of supplies. The family lined up to see them off, Carlos leaning on crutches but grinning. "When you bring down those corrupt bastards," he said, "you tell them the Vasquez family sends their regards." "We will," Elena promised. The ride to Santa Fe took 4 days of hard travel. They kept off the main roads, moving through rough country where pursuit would be difficult. At night, they took turns on watch, but they also talked about their pasts, their hopes, their fears. Jack learned that Elena had grown up on a small ranch near the Mexican border, that her mother had died when she was young, that her father had taught her to shoot and ride and stand up for herself, that she'd taken the clerk job in Santa Fe to send money home to her younger siblings. Elena learned that Jack had been a soldier before becoming a lawman, that he'd seen action in the Indian Wars and hated every minute of it, that he'd become a deputy because he wanted to protect people rather than fight them, that he'd been engaged to Emily for only 3 months before she died, but he'd loved her with the fierce certainty of youth. "Do you think you could love someone again?" Elena asked one night as they sat by the fire. Jack looked at her across the flames. "I think maybe I already do." The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. Elena's breath caught, and for a moment, neither spoke. "When this is over," she said finally, "what happens to us? I don't know. But I'd like to find out." On the afternoon of the 4th day, they crested a rise and saw Santa Fe spread below them, a sprawl of adobe buildings, church spires, and busy streets. Somewhere in that city was the evidence that could bring down a governor. And somewhere in that city were people who would kill to keep that evidence hidden. "Once we ride in," Jack said, "there's no going back. I know. Harrison's men will be watching the land office, the courthouse, anywhere you might go. We'll have to be smart careful." "I know that too." Elena looked at him, her dark eyes steady. "But we didn't come this far to turn back now." They rode into Santa Fe as the sun began to set. 2 dusty travelers on tired horses, anonymous among the crowds. Jack knew the city from his lawman days, knew which streets to avoid, which officials might still be honest, which ones had been bought. They stopped at a small hotel run by a widow Jack had helped years ago. She took one look at him and nodded, asking no questions, giving them a room in the back where they wouldn't be seen from the street. "The federal marshal," Jack said as they settled in. "He's our best bet. Marshal Garrett was an honest man when I knew him. If he's still in office, he can protect you while you testify. And if he's been compromised, then we improvise." Elena laughed, a sound that was more stress than humor. "That's a terrible plan. You have a better one?" "Not even a little bit." They spent the evening planning their approach. Jack would go to the marshal's office in the morning, feel out the situation. If it was safe, he'd bring Elena in. If not, well, they'd figure it out. That night, Jack lay awake in the darkness, Elena sleeping beside him. Tomorrow would likely bring violence, might bring death. But looking at this woman who'd come into his life like a whirlwind and turned everything upside down, Jack realized he wasn't afraid. For the first time in 5 years, he was living instead of just existing, fighting for something that mattered instead of running from his past. And whatever happened tomorrow, that was enough. Marshal Garrett turned out to be exactly as Jack remembered, a grizzled veteran with iron gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. He listened to Jack's story without interrupting, his weathered face giving nothing away. When Jack finished, Garrett leaned back in his chair and sighed. "You're putting me in a hell of a position, Callahan. I know. But if what Elena says is true, oh, it's true. I've suspected Harrison and his people of land fraud for months, but I've had no proof, no witnesses willing to testify." He fixed Jack with a hard stare. "And now you bring me both. Along with half of Harrison's hired guns dead or in custody. Driscoll and his men got what they deserved. Won't argue that. But it doesn't make my job easier. Garrett stood and moved to the window, looking out at the street. Harrison has connections: judges, politicians, businessmen. Even with solid evidence, getting a conviction won't be easy. But possible? Possible, yes. I'll need to see these documents your lady has hidden. If they're as damning as you say, I can bring charges. Might even be able to get a federal prosecutor involved. He turned back to Jack. But you need to understand, the moment Harrison knows we have a witness and evidence, he'll come at you with everything he's got. Not outlaws this time. Lawyers, judges, men who kill with paperwork instead of guns. Let him come. Garrett smiled grimly. You've changed, Callahan. Last time I saw you, you were broken. Running from your own shadow. Someone reminded me who I used to be. This woman of yours? Yeah. Then she must be something special. Bring her in. Let's see if we can't make this right. Jack brought Elena to the marshal's office an hour later. She'd cleaned up, put on a dress borrowed from the hotel owner, but there was no hiding the steel in her spine or the determination in her eyes. She and Garrett went over the evidence location, the details of what she'd witnessed, the names of the people involved. Jack stood watch by the window, his hand never far from his gun, watching the street for any sign of trouble. All right, Garrett said finally. Here's what we're going to do. Miss Morales and I will go to the land office with 2 of my deputies. We'll retrieve the documents, bring them back here, and I'll telegraph the federal prosecutor's office immediately. With any luck, we'll have charges filed by tomorrow morning. And me? Jack asked. You stay here. Guard the office. If Harrison's men come ... He tossed Jack a deputy's badge. You're official again, at least for today. Do what needs doing. Jack stared at the badge in his hand. It had been 5 years since he'd worn one. 5 years since he'd stood as a symbol of law and justice. The weight of it felt both foreign and familiar. I'll keep them out, he promised. Elena crossed to him, took his hand. Be careful, you too. When this is over, Jack Callahan, you're taking me to dinner. Somewhere nice. Somewhere where nobody's shooting at us. It's a date. She kissed him, quick and fierce, then followed Garrett and his deputies out the door. Jack watched them go, then turned to survey the marshal's office. 2 doors, 4 windows, a gun rack on the wall. Defensible if he was smart about it. He didn't have to wait long. An hour after Elena left, a well-dressed man entered the office, flanked by 2 rough-looking characters who had "hired gun" written all over them. The well-dressed man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. I'm looking for Marshal Garrett, he said. He's out. Can I help you? Perhaps. I'm Thomas Baines, legal counsel for Governor Harrison. I understand a woman named Elena Morales has been spreading slanderous accusations about my client. I'm here to have her brought in for questioning. On what charges? Does it matter? I have paperwork. He held up a sheaf of documents. Signed by Judge Morrison. So if you'll just tell me where Miss Morales is ... double quotes. Jack smiled, and it was not a friendly expression. I don't think so. Baines's smile faded. You're interfering with legal proceedings. I'm protecting a witness from being silenced by corrupt officials. There's a difference. You're making a serious mistake. Governor Harrison is a powerful man. Then he shouldn't mind standing trial to prove his innocence. Baines studied Jack for a long moment, then nodded to his 2 companions. Take him. The hired guns moved forward, hands moving toward their weapons. Jack's Colt cleared leather faster than either of them expected, and suddenly they were staring down the barrel of his revolver. Gentlemen, Jack said calmly, I suggest you reconsider. I'm officially deputized, which means killing me is killing a federal officer. That's a hanging offense. Are you really willing to die for Harrison's money? The 2 men looked at each other, then at Baines, who'd gone pale. We don't have to kill you, one of them said. Just rough you up a bit, take you somewhere quiet. You could try. But I guarantee at least one of you won't walk away. Maybe both. Jack's voice hardened. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to turn around and walk out that door. Baines here is going to take his fake paperwork and go back to whatever hole Harrison crawled out of. And I'm going to forget this conversation ever happened. And if we don't? Baines demanded. Then I start shooting, and we see how things play out. But I'll tell you this, I've spent the last week fighting my way across the territory to get that woman here safely. I've been beaten, shot at, and nearly killed more times than I can count. 2 more bodies won't weigh on my conscience nearly as much as letting you take her. The hired guns must have seen the truth in Jack's eyes, because they backed down. Baines sputtered protests, but Jack just kept his gun trained on them until they left. When the door closed behind them, Jack let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. His hands were steady though, no shake, no hesitation. Whatever he'd lost in the 5 years since Emily's death, he'd apparently kept his nerve. Elena and Garrett returned 2 hours later, Elena clutching a leather case full of documents. Her face was flushed with triumph. "We got them," she said. "Every piece of evidence I hid. Transfer deeds, correspondence, payment records. It's all here." Garrett was already drafting telegrams, his deputies standing guard. "With this, we can bring charges against Harrison and at least 6 of his associates. It's going to be a hell of a trial." "Baines was here," Jack said. "Harrison's lawyer. He tried to take Elena under some fake court order. He'll try again," Garrett warned. "And next time, he'll bring more men. Let him try." Elena set down the case and crossed to Jack, taking his hands in hers. "This is real now. We're really doing this. Are you ready? With you beside me?" "Yes." The trial started 3 days later. The federal prosecutor arrived from Denver, a sharp-eyed woman named Catherine Wells who took one look at Elena's evidence and smiled like a wolf. Harrison and his associates were arrested, though they posted bail immediately and promised a vigorous defense. The courtroom was packed every day. Elena testified with calm precision, laying out exactly what she'd witnessed and what the documents proved. Jack sat in the gallery, his deputy's badge still pinned to his chest, ready to act if Harrison's people tried anything. They tried, of course. Witnesses were threatened, bribed, intimidated. But Garrett and his deputies, bolstered by federal authority, kept everyone safe. Slowly, methodically, Wells built her case. On the 7th day of testimony, the defense called Jack to the stand. Harrison's lead attorney, a slick Easterner named Caldwell, smiled at him like a shark. "Mr. Callahan, isn't it true that you were dismissed from your position as deputy marshal 5 years ago?" "I resigned, after your reckless actions resulted in the death of an innocent civilian." The courtroom went silent. Jack felt every eye on him, felt the old guilt rising. But when he looked at Elena in the front row, he saw her steady gaze, her silent support. "Emily Dawson died because I made a mistake," Jack said clearly. "I took on a gang of outlaws alone when I should have waited for backup. She followed me because she was worried I'd get myself killed. When the shooting started, she was caught in the crossfire. Her death was my fault, and I've carried that guilt every day since. And yet now you claim to be protecting Miss Morales? How can anyone trust you won't make the same mistake again?" Jack met the lawyer's eyes. "I can't promise I won't make mistakes. Nobody can. But I can promise that I'll die before I let anything happen to Elena Morales. I've spent 5 years running from responsibility, from connection, from the possibility of failing someone again. But she taught me that living in fear of failure isn't living at all. So yes, I'm protecting her. And I'll keep protecting her no matter what you or Harrison or anyone else does to stop me." The lawyer tried a few more questions, but Jack's testimony had resonated with the jury. More than that, it had freed something inside him, the last chains of guilt that had bound him to the past. On the 10th day, the jury returned a guilty verdict. Governor Harrison and 5 of his associates were convicted of fraud, conspiracy, and in Harrison's case, accessory to murder for the deaths in Rio Seco. The sentences were harsh. Harrison would spend the rest of his life in prison. When the verdicts were read, Elena grabbed Jack's hand and squeezed. They'd done it. Against all odds, they'd won. 6 months later, Jack stood on the porch of a small house on the outskirts of Santa Fe, watching the sun set over the mountains. Inside, Elena was cooking dinner, singing softly to herself in Spanish. The house wasn't much: 2 bedrooms, a kitchen, a small corral for the horses. But it was theirs, bought with some of the reward money the territorial government had offered for bringing down Harrison's corruption ring. Jack was wearing his deputy's badge again, working with Marshal Garrett to clean up the territory. It turned out that helping bring down a governor was good for your reputation. People who'd written him off as a coward were willing to give him a second chance. But more than that, Jack had given himself a second chance. He still thought about Emily, still carried the sorrow of her loss, but it no longer defined him. She'd wanted him to be happy, to live fully, to be the kind of man who stood up for what was right. Honoring her memory meant doing exactly that. The door opened and Elena stepped out, wiping her hands on her apron. She'd taken a position with the territorial administration, helping to sort out the land fraud cases and return stolen property to the rightful owners. It was exhausting work, but it mattered. "Dinner's ready," she said, then paused, seeing something in his expression. "What are you thinking about?" "The day I pulled you out of that canyon. When you asked me why I'd save you, I remember. You said it was because you couldn't ride away again. That was part of it. But the real answer ... Jack turned to her, taking her hands in his. "The real answer is that the moment I saw you, something in me recognized something in you. Courage, determination, a refusal to let the world break you. And I knew that if I didn't help you, I'd spend the rest of my life regretting it." Elena smiled, the same fierce smile he'd first seen in that canyon. "So you saved me out of self-interest?" "I saved you because you were worth saving. Because you reminded me that I was worth saving too." He pulled her close. "And I'll keep saving you every day for the rest of our lives, if you'll let me." "I will. But Jack..." "Yeah? I'm going to save you right back." They kissed as the sun dipped below the horizon, 2 souls who'd found each other in the darkness and chosen to walk toward the light together. Inside the house, dinner was burning, but neither of them cared. They had tomorrow to worry about that. Tonight they had each other, and that was more than enough.
Thanks for watching this story till the end. Comment below and tell me where you're watching from. And before you go, check out these other amazing Western stories waiting for you next. Subscribe, like, and I'll see you on the next ride.